So the element space. So we've been listening to Amrita on the element air, and if there's one thing we can take from that, is that air is energy that is free to move in all directions at once. So what's the difference between that and space? Well, space is what that air expands into and allows that air to continually perpetuate itself indefinitely. It may seem then that space is static, but I think it's more like it's just everywhere, all at once, boundless and infinite. So I'd like to start with talking just a little bit about things that inspire me from Western science. I'm not a scientist, I wasn't trained in physics or anything, but I hear these kind of similes every so often. And I'd just like to read one or two of them out, see if they have a similar effect on you that they have on me. They put me into a state of awe. So some of you probably know these. There are more planets in the known universe than grains of sand on Earth. There are more atoms in our bodies than planets in the known universe. There's more space between atoms in our bodies than space between planets in the known universe, relatively speaking. I could go on. The known universe is only a tiny fragment of the total universe. These kind of things put me in a state of awe, as I said, and give me a sense of almost unfathomable enormity. And as we know, Western science is based on, physics is based on Newtonian ideas, going back to Euclidean, I think, ideas. The Newtonian Euclidean idea would be that space is the context through which particles move. Or perhaps there's Einstein's model, which it's the model of space as of a space-time continuum, where it's like a fabric of space that can also bend. So these models and similes seem to be almost comprehensible in their vastness. But I wonder if that's because we relate them to our own personal sense of space, my space, which of course is very, very small in comparison. So, you know, if you stand next to a very big person, you get a slight sense of awe, perhaps. Or if you're in the Himalayas and you look at Annapurna, it's a sheer wall of rock going up maybe 10,000 feet. It just looks totally out of place and puts everything else, you know, in a state of smallness by comparison. So it just feels enormous. But of course, space in Western science is born out of the observation of nature, which is confined entirely to the material universe. So science is just looking at the material universe. But this, from a Buddhist point of view, is very, very small and superficial in comparison to the Buddhist idea of space. So let's just spend a moment just I won't speak for a minute or so, and just reflect on some of that I said. So in Buddhism, then, space means the space of your mind. It's not a material space. In Sanskrit, this is called akasha, something like infinite space. And from this perspective, all the previous four elements, earth, water, fire, air, are considered in Buddhism, considered rupa, or form, or the world of form. So there's a difference between how we take space and how we take the other four elements, the world of form or rupa. The other four elements, rupa, are all affected by other things and affected by each other. So they're conditioned. That means they have no independent existence. They all arise in dependence upon something else and are affected by other things. So they're, by definition, then insubstantial and impermanent. Unless, of course, you take them as metaphors for mental states, which some of the other speakers have done so beautifully. Now, rupa is an interesting word because it also can be translated as beauty. So I think there's a clue there as to how Buddhism suggests that we take the world of form. It's suggesting that we take it aesthetically, have a non-utilitarian attitude to it. So this reminds me of flying in an aeroplane. When I was 12, my parents took me to Venice and we flew over the Alps and I had the window seat. And every time I go in an aeroplane, if I can, I try and get the window seat. I love looking at the landscape underneath and the changing landscape. And it's very easy, I think, if you do this yourself, to see everything as beautiful. Even the cities can look beautiful from that far up. So it's almost like that's a little bit of an analogy of how Buddhism suggests that we take the world. We take it aesthetically. We not even look for the beauty, but if we take something aesthetically without a utilitarian attitude, without grasping or aversion, then we just see it for what it is. And there is beauty in that. It's already there. Well, I think maybe the beauty is in the attitude, actually. So perhaps that gives us a little bit of a clue as to what space feels like. And of course, this space element, just like the other elements, are in our experience all the time. But perhaps sometimes we don't always recognize it for what it is. It's constantly there. But do we always recognize it? A little bit more difficult to identify, isn't it, than to grasp? So how do we connect with space, open the doorways? Well, first of all, we need to, if we don't do this already, of course, learn to recognize it in our everyday experience. If it's there all the time, it's available to us all the time. And one of the key ways we can do this is through the imagination. I think there was a quote by Einstein. He was asked by a reporter, what do you think we should teach children? And he said, fairy tales, folk tales. And the journalist nodded and then said, but what should we teach them when they get older? He said, more fairy tales and folk tales. So what does this mean? Well, I think it might mean that a good story should open and expand your mind and leave it open, so you can never go back. This is similar to how I think this is a similar way as to how space enables us, enables air, not just to expand into it, but to do this perpetually. So a good story can open the mind, but then it can help. If it's really working, the mind remains affected and changed by it and can never quite go back. I often think this is something like what happens when you're first introduced to the metta bhavana practice. Even if you don't do it that much, I think the whole idea of unconditional loving kindness and how to develop it and love for all beings is something that can completely change you, and you never go back from that. But we don't need to be a William Blake to have imagination, an artist or a poet or whatever, though that can help, obviously. And by imagination, I don't mean just the ability to visualize. As we know, some people are better at visualizing, some people are better at feeling, sensing. In terms of the metta bhavana, you get a feeling sense of your friend. That's just as much imagination. But we can use just very ordinary things to cultivate our imagination. So I'll give you an idea what I mean. When I was growing up, when I was going to secondary school, I used to walk 2 miles every day to the school, and then I'd walk 2 miles back at the end of the day. And quite often now I imagine that walk. So, from going out of my front door, turning right at the end of the drive, going up the street and so on through the park, over the main road, up the slope by the stream, turn right onto a long road through an estate. And I use that walk as a kind of guided visualization. It gives me a context. And yes, memories arise, things I'd forgotten, but also not just from the time when I was at school, from later in life when I would associate particular points of that walk with an experience. And I found that a very rich practice, because I remember different things associated with that walk or with the place. And a place has associations. And where's that happening? It's happening in my mind as I'm doing it. I'm traveling in space and time through my imagination. And we can do that, and we do that, I have no doubt, all the time. Unless it's too traumatic, just close your eyes and remember your front door when you were 10 years old, if you can. Hopefully most of you can do that. And so you've gone straight there. You've traveled in space and time. So there's been a few times in my life that I could say that I've got flashes of the space element, or hints of it, or suggestions of it. Um, so I'll just share one or two of those things, perhaps, in the hope that it will maybe stimulate you to remember your own similar experiences. I think the strongest one for me, and I'm not going to say too much about this one, because it feels a little bit personal, but was when I was not long after I'd been ordained in about 1981, or so, maybe 82. I was in India, in Bodh Gaya, and I was walking around the Mahabodhi temple, just kind of saying my mantra and circumambulating it. And there was a Tibetan puja going on, you know, a lot of monks and 1,000 butter lamps. And I was listening very closely to their chanting. And some kind of shift in my consciousness happened then. Uh, so that was perhaps the strongest one for me. But there's been one or two other, which I think are similar things, on a much less scale. So I'll tell you, the first one I can remember is at one time I got into going into flotation tanks, and I got so keen on it that I wanted to do the whole night in one. And that, so it was a Rajneesh Health Centre helped set me up with somebody to be my minder, and I went in there with the idea of spending all night in there. Actually, I had to come out after 4 hours. It was too intense, but it was still quite a long time in there. And I think I remember that really stands out is that I've been in there for quite a long time, and then my hand touched the side, and I realized that I'd been not in my body exactly, quite happily in my body, but not experiencing my physical boundaries as normal. And when my hand touched the side, it was a real surprise. I suddenly realized I'd got a body. So where was my mind during that time? It was both, I was in my body, but I was much more expanded. My sense of where my physical boundaries were completely I'm not going to say transcended, but I was beyond my normal sense of physical boundaries. So I think that that's a hint of that kind of thing, if you ever had anything like that. And another one was years later when I was swimming in the sea off Brighton, and there was quite a heavy swell, and I was swimming out to a buoy, and because of the swell, it was taking quite a long time. And there was a certain point, and I don't even know how long this was. It could have been seconds or minutes, when I couldn't tell what was my body and what was the sea. We were completely at one. And I also didn't know whether I was dead or alive. And it didn't matter. It was quite a pleasant experience. So, again, I don't know exactly what that was, but I think it's something like being in the space element. And perhaps also in that situation, you could say that I was completely enjoying the experience of being in the water aesthetically. It was beautiful, but I didn't know what was me and what was the water, where I finished and the water began. So I also was thinking, well, as people, in terms of people I've met in my life, um, who would be an example of somebody who I think um, seemed to inhabit the space realm more, have more of the space element in their life. But when I was in my 20s, I used to spend quite a lot of time with Sangharakshita. Um, and one of the things you felt when you were around Sangharakshita was that you had enormous space just to experience your own process. Um, I'm sure other people would who knew him would say something similar. In fact, I used to uh, welcome people who were coming for a visit with Sangharakshita, and very often they'd be nervous about going to see him. But then when they came out, well, they'd come out in varying degrees of states of mind, and sometimes people would be quite annoyed and upset. And it turns out, because I often drove them back to Norwich, it was usually because he hadn't told them what to do. So, yeah, he was somebody who, not exactly giving you space, but didn't interfere with you in any way in your process, and would allow you to have the fullness of your process, which actually is quite a rare thing. Also, I mean, you get the best of Sangharakshita listening to his talks and reading his books. There's no doubt about that. But being around him a lot, some quite odd things could happen. So, on numerous occasions, he would read my mind. So, I'm not going to tell you anything specific, but I would say something like, "Guess what happened to me, today?" And very often he'd just say it out loud straight away, instantly. You did this, or this happened to you, or whatever. One incident like this, I will tell you, because it's in the public sphere, as it were. It's quite common knowledge, I think. So in 1989, Sangharakshita attended the International Buddhist Conference in Berlin, and it was right at the time when the Berlin Wall was coming down. And the delegates were waiting for the Dalai Lama to turn up. And one of the Dalai Lama's assistants came into the room, and he said, "Very sorry, but the Dalai Lama is delayed." And he had a ball of newspaper in his hands, screwed up ball of newspaper. And he put it down on the table with a thump, and he said to all the delegates, "What's in there?" Nobody answered. So he turned to Sangharakshita and said, "Sangharakshita, what's in there?" And he said, "It's a piece of the Berlin Wall." And they opened the newspaper, and there it was, a piece of the concrete. So I'm relating this anecdotally, so I hope I'm correct. Dharma Priya, who was with him, said, "How did you do that? How did you know that?" He said, "I didn't know that." He said, "I just had nothing on my mind. And that's the first thing that came into my mind." So I think that's a clue as to how you can have these experiences with somebody like Sangharakshita, is that he was inhabiting the space realm most of the time. That was his normal mental state. And then, when something was asked of him, his mind was completely clear. And whatever the first thing was that came into his mind, I'm not saying he's always correct on that, but that's how he does it, kind of. There was another time when I was together with Sangharakshita indoors. He was standing, and I had the distinct sense that he wasn't there, even though he was there. So this wasn't like sitting with his body at Adhisthana during his funeral. He was clearly dead then. But on this occasion, he was standing there, but I had the distinct experience that he wasn't there. He disappeared. I think if I'd have reached out and poked him, he would immediately respond. So it wasn't that he was elsewhere in some kind of trance or off somewhere. It was that he was everywhere. He was here and there. This was during a time when an older member had just died. I think Sangharakshita was particularly fond of him. And I don't know, sometimes I think that perhaps he was in some way communing with that older member who was called Vangisa. But anyway, that sticks in my mind as another example of how something or somebody in that mental state can be here and everywhere else at the same time. All right, we'll just have a minute to absorb some of that, and then I'll give Mimi the nod and we can go into breakout rooms. If you don't want to be in a breakout room, but you would quite like to join in the plenary at the end, then just don't go into the breakout rooms and just shut off your video and sound and then come back later. You're more than welcome to do that. Shall we break out then, Mimi?
Yeah, that's fine. Zoe will be helping us with the breakout rooms, thankfully, today. Just, yes, as Kevala said, if you don't want to join, you're welcome to stay in the room or to put your videos on mute and off. Kevala, how long are they going to be in the breakout room so people know if they don't want to go in, when to come back?
Shall we say 8:20?
So at 8:20, we'll be coming back. And are there any questions you would like them to ponder on?
Well, anything, but perhaps it would be interesting anyway for me to hear anyone else's experience that seemed to in some way chime with some of the things I've been saying about space element.
Okay, so we'll put you into breakout. Well, the lovely Zoe is going to be putting you into breakout rooms, thankfully, and otherwise I'd lose you all, I think. And we'll see you back about 8:20. Fantastic. Well, we'll continue and resume your talk, Kevala, and the recording also. So please stay on mute, everyone, until there's Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah. So, has anyone got any comments or anything that interesting that came out of your discussion group, or any questions? Just fire away.
Hi, Kevala. It's Nabs here. Hi. We met on Sangha nights before, on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the last point that came up in our lovely group was I was just wondering about cultivating the conditions for those kind of things to occur, because I realised I didn't think I'd have much of a connection with space element, but actually I've got half a page of examples like your examples, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was sort of thinking, well, are some people just more kind of innately lurking in the space element, or can we actually nurture conditions to have those kind of experiences where we're sort of transcending the boundaries of, the obvious?
Yeah, great question. I think it's it not only should we I don't think it's necessarily that some people are more susceptible. Potentially we're all susceptible, and it's more like in fact we should be going out of our way to try and create those conditions where those experiences might more spontaneously arise or emerge. So normal practice is one of those conditions, practice of mindfulness, ethics and meditation will all put us in a state of mind which is calmer, less cognitive activity going on, less thinking and so on. All those things will help us to not even cultivate the space element, but just have a more clear and simplified mental experience. And then it will naturally reveal itself because it's there all the time, isn't it? It's in everything that we do. We can't have an experience of any of the other elements without the space element being there. It's like the ghost in the room. It's in the background all the time. If you remember what I said, the space element is that which allows all the other elements to be. It's the context. So it's there all the time. So like I said, we don't have to be great artists to cultivate imagination. We have the imaginal faculty there at our disposal all the time. We can remember what our front door looked like when we were a child. We've gone there in space and time. So I think if we lead simpler lives, less busy, do nothing as a practice, bring space into our lives, then it'll start to become more part of our normal experience.
I think just an observation here. I think sometimes the idea of opening up to that space can be quite scary because, where are the boundaries? Where, it's like you were talking there, Kevala, about, touching the sides of the deprivation tank, it's, yeah, just that, and for myself personally, that in the past when I have had extremely spacious moments, sometimes it's that boundary between sort of trying to appreciate it while at the same time not trying to be freaked out because it is just so big.
Yeah, sure. I think it's about grounding yourself in the foundation of mindful practice that gives you the resources to be able to open up to it. But it's that strange paradox, isn't it? You're there but elsewhere at the same time. So you have to be grounded in mindfulness to be able to experience space more. Seems like a paradox, but they're intimately entwined. I mean, the mind naturally wants to move towards space. If you give it the right conditions, like I said, simplicity. If you begin to introduce space in an ordinary way into your life, value it, like doing nothing as a practice. So where the practice of doing nothing is that if you're doing nothing and then your mind starts to go off towards something, you bring it back to doing nothing. Or you think, oh, I must just, you know, put the washing up away in the cupboard before I can sit down, or whatever other 101 things may come to your mind while you're doing nothing. The only practice is to not do them now. I often, when I'm doing nothing, I often have a notepad next to me. And if I've got something so important that I must get up and do it now, or I'll just write it down and then not do it now, do it later. Right now, for this half hour, I'm not doing anything. And if we do that kind of thing, that brings spaciousness into our everyday activity. We get less tense, less driven. Our mind, we're more relaxed, which is a necessary component of opening up to space. We can start to be more receptive to what's already there. But you're quite right, Chris. I completely agree with you. You know, it can freak you out if you have a very strong experience and you've not got the grounding for it. But that's the work that we have to do.
I wonder if you work up, you know, through the elements effectively, really.
Yeah.
You know, so if you really, you know, you're kind of aware of the earth element and your posture and you balance it and everything, so that you know where the bones are, where the muscles are, and then you kind of you know you can relax because you know you're going to be supported and that, and then you get a sense of freedom, you know, because you don't have to be thinking about what your body's doing. It'll look after itself, and then you feel like, oh, my mind's free to look at other things now, you know. So it's like maybe we work up through the elements in that sort of way, and once we've dealt with them, we can move up kind of on slightly onto the next one or something.
Yeah, in the formal practice, that's the way it goes, isn't it? Yeah. But you know, I think it's got something to do with in everyday life. It's more like understanding Rupa in your experience and in the world around you, and beginning to cultivate an aesthetic attitude to it. So it's there, you're grounded in Rupa, but you don't get caught up in craving and aversion for your for the things in the world around you or your mental states and so on. You let go, you work on letting go of that. So what you're doing is you're just taking things as they are and appreciating, trying to appreciate them as they are. In other words, see the beauty in them without grasping or aversion. It's the grasping and aversion that makes them ugly. If you can let go of that, then things are just as they are, perfect as they are, beautiful. And that does do exactly what you're talking about, Mahmoudi, I think, which is it releases your energy and your mind to be able to be more imaginative, spacious. A couple of people in my breakout group were resonating with some of the things I was saying about, like swimming in the sea and so on. I wondered if anybody else had, in their own way, a similar kind of experience.
Yes, in our group we mentioned swimming a little bit, and that sense of space and a little bit of something else going on, a bit of freedom. I mean, for me, the very obvious association with that kind of space is joyousness. unboundedness within the sea, the you know, completely supported by it, but able to move in any direction. Ability to let go into it a little bit.
Priyadaka, hiya.
Hello.
Can I say something again, Kevala? It's Abs.
Of course.
Yeah, so I got, I'm a sea swimmer. I tend to swim all year round. And I got caught out about 5 years ago. And I knew I was in trouble the minute my feet left the floor. And I was pinned, a few minutes later, I was pinned down, face down to the seabed with the water, the undercurrents hitting my back. And I ran out of breath, and I just let go, and I actually felt very relaxed and very free in those moments where essentially I was, you know, arguably starting to die, and I just felt completely at peace. I did eventually manage to get out of the sea, and actually that was much worse. Getting out and being back on land was much more upsetting than being pinned down. Bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Things are upside down.